This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with Garrett Oliver, the Brewmaster from Brooklyn Brewery. How are you today, sir?
I'm excellent.
My first question for you, can you remember your very first taste of beer?
Yes, I actually do. You know, I used to pester my uncle, who lived north of the city, and every summer he'd be sitting out there with his can of Miller High Life. And when I was a kid, I'm like, let me taste it, let me taste it, let me taste it, let me taste it. And finally, one day, I was maybe 11 years old. He says, "You want to taste it? Fine, here." And he hands me the can, and I go like, doop, doop, doop. Yeah. And I spat it into the grass, and I didn't have another taste of beer for like 5 or 6 years. You know, it was pretty horrible.
Well, it's Miller High Life as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. I learned later that my reaction was, shall we say, normal.
So can you remember that second taste of beer? Can you remember when you actually got the beer bug? Was there actually that epiphanal moment?
Well, you know, when I was 16, me and my best friend Larry went to a place in New York called Chumley's, you know, with our feathery mustaches, pretending to be older. At the time, you could be 18 and go in and drink. And we ordered 2 pints of Guinness, which Larry had tasted and said was the best thing ever. And I fell in love with that. And then after that, not very long after that, a couple of years later, I moved to London. And that's where I really fell in love with beer, you know, falling in love with the cask-conditioned beer. And I thought I had known what beer was when I was in college, but in fact, I discovered the stuff we were drinking was, it was kind of more of a facsimile of beer than real beer. And I went traveling around Europe, and I got back to the United States and discovered that we, in fact, didn't have any beer. And so I set out to make some.
And how did you go about doing that? What was your introduction to that world of fermentation science?
Well, same best friend Larry got tired of hearing me complain about how I couldn't get any decent beer, so he said, "Fine, here." You know, gave me a homebrewing kit for Christmas in 1985 and said, "Do it yourself." You know, so I did. And it became a hobby that slowly took over my life, and eventually I went to work for a guy named Mark Whitty, who had been the head brewer for Samuel Smith's at Tadcaster in England. Famous brewery, and he had started a place called Manhattan Brewing Company in New York City, and I became his apprentice in 1989.
Now, you're the brewmaster at Brooklyn Brewery, but you make beer all over the world, do you not?
Well, I wouldn't say we make beer all over the world. We sell beer, you know, in a lot of different places. We've always had a very international attitude. You know, me coming out of England for my background, other members of the brewery coming from other places in the world. But we actually are producing beer now in Italy with great partners, the Amarcord Brewery, who are outside of Rimini. I really started going to Italy a lot when I got involved with Slow Food on the international side. I was a founder for Slow Food USA. So we've been going back and forth, and so this project, producing some beers in Italy, is really special. But we were also the first brewery in the United States to do collaborations between ourselves and other breweries. So I've brewed beers in Belgium, I've brewed lots of beers in the UK, in Denmark, Sweden, all over the place, and had those brewers come and make some beers with us. So
I see.
Yeah, it's always a good time.
So tell me a little bit more about your involvement with the slow food movement, because when I was reading through your biography, I immediately was drawn towards that particular fact. What was it that attracted you to the slow food movement, and what do you feel you have achieved throughout your time with them?
Well, I think that it's interesting because slow food has really evolved. It started off more as a gastronomical organization and evolved into an eco-gastronomical organization. So the way I like to try to explain it to people is, you have to have real land to grow real tomatoes, and you ought to know how to grow tomatoes, and you ought to know how to make your grandmother's tomato sauce. And the way you should learn it is from actually talking to your grandmother and having dinner with her. You know, I mean, it's a very holistic sort of look at food and the table, you know, in the center of human life. And to me, that's really important. It's important for cooking. I'm a wine geek, I'm a cocktail geek, and I'm a food geek as much as a beer geek. And all of these things kind of center around the table where we have a lot of the best times in our entire lives. And as Americans especially, we don't make enough time to spend the time at the table. And so it is about slowing down your life, but it's also about paying attention to food heritage and your surroundings. But I first got involved really looking at what Slow Food was doing with their cheese festival in Italy and reading their catalog and it says, okay, at the top of this mountain are these three guys, who have these goats that haven't been bred out in 500 years, and they make this special kind of cheese you can find nowhere else in the world. And here today, you'll have the goats, the three guys, and the cheese together with whatever and a string band, and you're like, what? And there's the way they just brought so much liveliness and depth, to everything that they did. So, I first really got involved with slow food, at the Cheese Festival in Brewer in 1999, and soon after that was helping set up the national office for the United States.
And did you manage to bring a little bit of beer into the slow food movement?
Well, that was another thing that attracted me to slow food. Unlike a lot of other well-respected gastronomical organizations, slow food was always serious about beer. Michael Jackson, the beer writer, wrote for them extensively, to the extent that they actually published a book of his writings for the Slow Food magazine. And I think that was one of the reasons why Italy is now, one of the real hotspots for craft beer around the world, is because a lot of Michael's works were written in, well, not written in Italian, but first published in Italian. And so you have 320 craft breweries in Italy, which is amazing. A lot of them doing a lot of really creative stuff. So, I think that Slow Foods had a great influence that way, and just because they come originally out of Italy, which of course is a great wine producer, that has not made them at all people who look away from beer. In fact, they're among the most fun people to pour beer for.
Speaking of beers from all over the world, what are your impressions of Canadian beer?
When I look at Canada right now, and of course, Canada is a big country with, very regional in its focus. I almost see the United States maybe, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, with a lot of excitement, with brewers coming up, and kind of, a wave kind of getting ready to start cresting. I think there's a lot of good stuff out there. I tasted a number of local beers last night. Looking forward to tasting more today. The quality overall is really high. I think that they haven't yet sort of started to push the boundaries of flavor, etc. But I think that's good. They've kind of, they're starting at a very sort of, subtle and controlled sort of level, and I expect, eventually you're going to start seeing, a little bit more wildness, if you like, in what's going on. There are exceptions. For example, Dieu de Ciel out of Montreal, really taking on, for example, a Belgian sort of cast of things, as opposed to the sort of more British-based brewing that you're largely seeing from the Canadian brewers.
One final question for you, Garrett. What does good food mean to you?
Good food means to me, that's a good question. Sunday I'm doing a dinner with 11 Madison Park, who are, one of those lists. I think it's the San Pellegrino list, top restaurants in the world, and I think they're, number 7 or something like that, 4 stars from the New York Times. Really, really serious dinner, all paired with beers. And I'm really sort of greatly looking forward, to that. And the dinner's going to be spectacular. I've been to El Bulli, I've been to some of the great temples of food in the world. But then again, a really excellent slice of pizza is a very difficult thing to beat, when it comes to just flooding your brain with pure pleasure. So good food is kind of, in a way, it's contextual. It really depends on who you're with and what's going on and whether you're having a good time. I do think good food always has to be real food. It has to be made of actual ingredients. I think maybe it was Carlo Petrini who said that if you read the ingredients and no one's grandmother recognizes them, it's not food. So I generally don't eat anything like that. But I do some very complicated, serious cooking, and I do some, extra simple cooking, and I have to say I kind of like them equally. And the best thing is to, put them in front of a bunch of my favorite people and get some drinks and have a good time.
Thank you very much for joining us today at the Good Food Revolution. We look forward to catching up with you perhaps down in Brooklyn upon the next occasion.
Absolutely. We love to have visitors.
Give up!